Hello, everyone, and welcome to All Things SAP and on Azure. Together with Prasanjit and Sambit, we are here today once again to talk to you about another interesting topic. This is now episode 5, and the topic for discussion is really around data integration into SAP. Whether it's on Azure or even if it's on-prem, this still applies, this conversation still applies. A nice topic that we're going to talk about today is something regarding the SAP CDC connector. I wouldn't steal too much of the thunder that Manish is going to talk about. Manish, we're really looking forward to actually hosting you, and we're looking forward to your presentation and your demos in the next few minutes or so. And once again, we really want to thank you for joining our show today and sharing your insights in this topic. But before I hand over to you, just a quick toast, a nice coffee, and to thank you once again for joining our show. With that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Manish, and Manish will do an intro and just maybe set the expectations in terms of what he's going to present and demo. Over to you, Manish.
Excellent. Thank you, Nishan and Prasant, for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be here and to talk about one of my favorite topics, SAP data on Azure. So I'm Manish Shah. I'm a SAP Cloud Solution Architect working for Microsoft for about 4+ years now. I've spent nearly a couple of decades working in the SAP, so I'm kind of giving away a little bit of my age there. But yeah, as I said, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to talk about various ways you can integrate SAP data on Azure using Azure native tooling. I'll give a little bit of overview of all the different connectivity and solutions that we have on Azure. And then I will deep dive into a new capability, which is called SAP CDC, which is in public preview right now. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I'll try and present a demo on SAP CDC.
That sounds cool. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
So let me share my screen. Right. So as I said, we'll look at the overview of various connectivity options that you have today on Azure. Then we will deep dive into the CDC connector. We'll look at the use cases and a demo. So briefly, we already have 6 SAP connectors in Azure. Depending on where your data is, depending on what type of data you want to fetch, we have already got a number of connectors which a lot of customers are already using. Using these connectors, you can extract data from SAP ECC, S/4HANA, BW. You can even use the ODBC, JDBC connectors to connect to the database layers. Some of the most common or most popular connectors are these SAP HANA connector, this table connector, and the BW Open Hub. There's also some other generic connectivity available in Azure to be able to connect or integrate with SAP applications. For example, HTTP or OData connections can be used for bi-directional communication with SAP. You can access the databases and so on and so forth. You can also have a bunch of connectivity available from the wider Azure services like Azure Functions, Logic Apps, and Power Apps, for example. But let's dive into the actual SAP CDC capability, and the name of the connector itself is called SAP ODP. So if you're already SAP data experts, you would have heard of the ODP, which is SAP's operational data provisioning framework. So the ODP connector is based on SAP's ODP framework. What it does is it allows Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse to connect to the SAP ODP framework, which then exposes a number of different sources from SAP into the framework. So the framework itself works on a consumer versus producer mechanism. So you have a bunch of consumers and producers, and you have a bunch of consumers. The ODP framework, as you can see there, it exposes SAP ECC extractors, CDS views. It exposes the BW objects. One of my favorite is the SLT. With SLT, you can expose, you can replicate SAP tables from a transactional system into SLT, and then SLT, the ADF can then connect to SLT and get all the change data from the source systems that way. So it really, in summary, the ODP framework really exposes a rich variety of sources. It enables the built-in Delta CDC capabilities to a lot of these sources, and it's simple and scalable, really.
So just a question on that. You're leveraging the ODP framework that already
Yeah.
exists, right, in the SAP environment. Is there specific prerequisites that you need to have already on the source systems like SAP NetWeaver to configure this connector, like NetWeaver certain version like 7.4 or service packs or whatever, those type of things?
Yeah, good question. So ODP has been around for a long time. In the previous older versions of NetWeaver, I think I can't even remember when it started, but the previous versions had ODP Protocol 2, ODP Protocol 1, and some of the more recent NetWeaver, which is probably starting from NetWeaver 7.4, they are based on, they support ODP Protocol 2. So other than having this source system, which is supporting ODP, you don't really need anything else. One exception is if you want to use SLT scenario there, you would obviously need an SLT system sitting in front of your source system. You can also use an inbuilt SLT, which is essentially the DMIS plugin. You can install it on a NetWeaver system or your ECC system, and that's all you need really there.
Okay, thank you, Manish.
Okay, so I think this slide is really, really important. It brings the entire premise to life there. As you can see, you've got the database tables, and then this is the SAP application. You've got the SAP tables, and depending on which provider type, or also known as the context, you're going to use ADF, you will configure it accordingly in Azure Data Factory or in Synapse. So for instance, we looked at the SAP extractors. They're basically your standard extractors sitting on top of SAP tables. SAP have delivered a ton of these extractors already. So if you want to use some of the existing ones, you already have a lot of choice there. It also, similar way, you can also expose the CDS views to the ODP framework and to ADF. And the demo we're going to look at today is going to be the SAP table, or I like to call them physical tables, because there are not any views created on top of them. So the SAP tables can be extracted using SLT, ODP, and then ADF. So if we move on, this is one quick slide. I promise I'll get into the demo pretty soon, but this is a slide to bring, to join the slideware into the real world. So this is the demo landscape. you have an Azure Data Factory sitting there, which works with an Azure um, self-hosted integration runtime. We need that to connect to SAP. And then on the left side, you have the ODP framework. In my scenario, I'm going to demo the SAP SLT. So I've got an SLT system there, which is connected to an ECC. And I'm going to show how the initial data load works through SLT. And then I'm going to make some transactional changes in ECC. And without changing anything in SLT or in ADF, I'll show how the actual delta changes are transmitted into Azure. The pipeline itself, you can actually create the pipeline in ADF or in Synapse, depending on what you prefer. But the pipeline is basically made of two big parts. One is ingest, the second is merge and write. Ingest is where I consume the ODP connector. It connects to SLT. SLT in turn fetches the data from the source system. So in the ADF's linked service, I'm going to configure the SLT system. And then depending on which ECC or which source system I want to fetch the data from, I can select the context accordingly. So if you have multiple ECC or multiple transactional systems connected to the same SLT, you would see them, all of those as a separate context there. And other than that, you have got the SAP extractors, you've got the CDS views, and you've got the BW context. On the right side, you have the second part, which is basically going to get all the data that is received from SLT. And if you've worked with SLT before, you would have seen if you create multiple changes to the same object, you get multiple records. So when the data lands in this step there, you will have multiple records potentially per multiple changes per record. So the second part of the pipeline is going to merge the changes, keep the latest record, and it's going to write it into Synapse. So that's what the demo scenario looks like today.
So just a question, Manish.
Sure.
So the delta changes, is that taking place there at the merge and the write at that point in time?
So if you imagine me creating a number of changes in the ECC system on the same object, maybe I change a purchase order a number of times. When I ingest the table, the purchase order table, it is going to ingest all of the changes. So for example, I would have created a item and I add the quantity as 1, and then I go back and change the quantity to 2. So when the data lands in this phase here, I am writing this data to a file, and it would actually write 2 records there. The first record says this purchase order number, this item number, and quantity 1. But it also adds columns at the end of the file, and the last few columns, which are ODQ column, and they then say what's the sequence number, what is the change mode of ODQ, is it create, is it update, is it delete, etc. And then the merge logic there reads those files and then merges them, keeps the latest record, and then writes it into Synapse.
Okay, so this files could be like a Parquet file, right?
Absolutely, it can be a Parquet file. It can be a text file. Okay. I'm going to show text file just because it's easier to show in a demo. But yeah, Parquet is a good option.
And Manish, one question here. So will there be a trigger which will automatically fetch the data, or how the mechanism of ingesting the data into the data lake or Synapse, what you're using for the offloading the data?
Yeah. So for the pipeline, you can either set the pipeline to run periodically, or you can also set a tumbling window trigger there so that it it's sort of near real time. It runs the first batch. As soon as it's finished, it can create another run. So you can create the trigger in the pipeline trigger can be created on the ADF side or Synapse side, whereas the actual physical table triggers are created by SLT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump into the demo. So that's my Azure Data Factory. Before we actually jump into the demo, I'm going to show the pipeline I have got here is created from a template gallery, and our brilliant engineers from the ADF team, they have delivered a lot of SAP templates already. The one that I have used is this, and I've parameterized it to make my life easy. But if you wanted to create the same pipeline, this is how you go into the gallery, you select this template. All you need is 3 linked services. The first one is a link service to connect to ADLS. The second one is to connect to Synapse. And third one is for SAP, which is the ODP connector. So this is the ODP connector, which reads from SAP. It writes into ADLS, and this is going to be the Synapse link service because it's going to write into Synapse. So if we go back, if we cancel that, I think there's one other thing I'd love to show, which is the connectors themselves. If you go to the link services and type SAP, this is where you find all the 7 connectors. As you can see, the ODP is there, and that's in public preview there. So with that, let's look at the pipeline quickly. That's exactly this is the template that I've created from the template, and I've just parameterized that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click run. I'm going to run this. It's going to take a minute or so, and then we will look at what the pipeline is actually going to do.
While you're doing that, what I do like is the fact that the connectors are native into ADF, and that we don't have to purchase a different connector and configure it and install it. It's bundled as part of Azure and ADF, so that's quite nice. And I also saw 7 connectors, which is
absolutely
quite nice. Yeah.
Oh, and one thing I wanted to show is let's look at the table, and that there's no records as not right now. And this is my ADLS store, and it has just literally, I think, created a file now. So we'll let the pipeline finish.
Yeah.
And let's take a look at what the pipeline looks like. So this is the copy activity, which is going to fetch data from SAP. And if I open the source data set, if I delete the context, and this is where you actually select your context. If you wanted a CDS view, you would select CDS view, and your link service would connect to the right SAP system to bring those CDS views. You've got the BW extractors, you've got a number of SLT contexts. The one I'm using right now in the pipeline is that. So that's that. And this is where you would specify the name of your object. In my case, the object would be EKKO because I'm extracting data from the purchase order header table, EKKO. So if we go back, another important parameter there is the extraction mode. As you can see, I've left it to Delta and I've not changed it. So it's an interesting, with ODP, it really works in a good way, because you'd have seen I didn't change that to full because I left it to Delta. When I've executed this pipeline for the first time, ADF goes to my SLT system, to the ODP mechanism, and says, hey, give me the, I'm a consumer so and so. I need the data from this context and this table, and give me the data. ODP mechanism says, this is the first time. It identifies that this is the first time this consumer has reached out, and therefore it does the initial full load for that. It creates a subscription, it does the full load, and then the data is sent to ADF. When I run this for the second time, I leave this to Delta as well, and no change there. And this time, ODP framework will have had a watermark, or a mark basically, and it identifies this ADF pipeline, this process, as a specific consumer, and it says this is the watermark for this consumer, and let's hand over only the changes or the delta that has happened from the previous extraction. And this is really, really quite powerful here. So that's my source.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
In the other connector, the table connector, there was not this option, right, of the delta. So this is new now in the CDC. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. So with table connector, you would have to build your own, almost like a pseudo code, or your own watermarking mechanism, so that you identify. There are some limitations with that, but this unlocks everything, if that makes sense.
That's pretty cool.
So that's my sync. The sync is, for the first step, the sync is ADLS, the blob store. I have parameterized my folder name, the path and the file name, and so on. I'm using a CSV, but as you said, Nishan, we can also use Parquet file there. So with that, let's go back to the pipeline run, and it's completed. So as you can see, this is the first step, which is SAP extracting data from SAP. So let's look at what's happened there. It succeeded. It has extracted 16,250 records from EKKO. And this screen shows you a few other stats as to how much time was taken at the source, listing of the source, reading from source, writing to sync, and it's not a lot of time. It's just taken about end-to-end 32 seconds to read the data. So if we close that, we look at some of the values there. So we're reading the object EKKO there, the name of the pipeline. I've got some projections there, and that these are the parameters that I've used. Now, if we look at what happened with the Synapse, that's completed as well. It's taken 18 seconds, and this is the basically this is the part of the pipeline which will accept all the changes and write into Synapse, merge and write into Synapse. So with that, let's look at quickly the file and see how it looks like. So we've extracted all the purchase order headers from EKKO. I've only selected a bunch of fields, not all fields. But if you see there at the end, we have ODQ change mode. Because this was an initial load, you see letter C there, which means create. All of these records have been created for the first time. And then you also see the entity counter there. If we look at Synapse, we have 16,250 records in the Synapse table. So now is the time to go to our SAP system and create a change. But before we do that, I'd also like to show you the SAP side of SLT And I have a number of source systems there. The one I'm using right now is that. So if I go into display, this is my SLT, and if you like, the context that is connecting to my ECC system. Whereas if you go to ODQ mom and select this specific queue, you are going to see a subscription that's been created by my ADF by when I executed the pipeline. So now the interesting part, let's create a new purchase order. I'm going to create it as a reference to this purchase order. Ignore the data incomplete. We're just going to save this purchase order. The number is ending with 723. Now, just to make things a bit more interesting, I'm going to go back and change the PO. I'm just going to copy it. So this is to show the point that if you change the same object multiple times, you are going to see multiple records in the file. But then when they are written to Synapse, you just should see one record added to Synapse. So go back to the pipeline. You got now again the same selections. You've got EKKO. You've got the key fields of EKKO. The database, the SQL table or the Synapse table is EKKO, and these are the projections. So run that. Now let's look at, whilst this pipeline is running, might take a few seconds. Let's look at some more advanced settings here. I've shown you that we use the projections, but I've not shown how they work. So if we go to the source data set, oh, sorry, not there. Yeah, so some of the advanced settings are degree of parallelism. You can set that. It works in a pretty similar way, like any other in ADF, except with SLT. With SLT, you're only parallelizing the transfer between SLT and ADF. You're not parallelizing the transfer between ECC and SLT, if you like. This is down to SAP ingestion.
So they are SLT controls, right? How the ingestion will happen.
Yeah. And this is the projections that I was talking about. If I delete that, essentially, if I refresh, this is essentially where you select your columns. If you don't want all 200 columns or 500 columns that the table has, you can choose the fields that you want to fetch. Another couple of important properties that I wanted to show was, how does SAP ODP know this process as a consumer? How does it identify? So if you go to the link service, if you go to edit, this is where I'm connecting to my SAP system. It looks very much similar to an SAP GUI connection. But if you scroll down to the end, this is the subscriber name. And this is the name that we saw there, MSADF. So this is the name of the subscriber or consumer. And there's one other property we need to look at, which is the subscriber process. I've parameterized that, but if we look at looks like I had a glitch Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can hear you. Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Now
go
it's
ahead.
fine.
Brilliant.
Yeah, no problem.
So I was talking about the subscriber process, and this is the subscriber process. So the consumer is identified by a combination of the subscriber name and subscriber process to the ODP framework in SAP. So if I delete my changes, um, yeah. So that's some of the inner details of how it works. Let's go back to the pipeline execution. This is the latest run. Look at that. Everything succeeded. Let's look at the SAP ingestion, and it's read 4 records here.
So the self-hosted integration runtime, uh, how many of those should we install? Because I believe it's like, you could have like one VM with a self-hosted integration runtime, and it manages the performance of the extraction. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Yeah.
yeah. So good question. You can add multiple nodes. If we go to my integration runtime, oh sorry, I can't. For some reason, I can't
No, it's
see that
fine.
there.
No problem.
Um, oh, I know why. I was in the wrong place. In
Okay.
the Synapse, I need to be in ADF because that's where I've got my SHIR. So here you can add multiple nodes to the SHIR. You can add up to 4 nodes to the SHIR. So you can scale up or you can scale out depending on your requirements.
That's pretty cool. Right.
If we go back to the pipeline run, let's look at the Synapse step has finished. And it's written a bunch of rows as well. So let's see what has happened to the files. As you can see, we've got a new file there, or new folder, and a new file inside. And we've got a new record created there. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, why we have additional rows, unless I'd created a subscription and I didn't reset it before the demo. But the idea is when you make a change, so for the order number 722, you have got a create when we created the first item, or when we created the purchase order, and then you have got for the same purchase order, you've got an update record there. So let's look at the number of records there. Now we have got 16 to 51 records there, and we should have, oops, and we should have the purchase order that we created there, 722. So I think that makes sense. It probably, I think it's probably one of my colleagues who would have created another purchase order in the meantime. So
Probably, yeah.
because we haven't created 723 here, so it's
Yeah.
gotta be
Yeah.
someone else.
Yeah.
But I think that's the demo I wanted to show here.
Yeah. Thank you, Manish. I mean, I think this is a really, really
Yeah.
good overview in terms of data integration into SAP using the SAP CDC connector. I think we need more and more customers going onto the CDC connector. I see a lot of value in this. Yeah. Sanjit, you wanted to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, with this Delta option, I think it was not available within our six SAP specific connectors. So I think this would be a turnkey solution for customers who are looking for a long time, that how we can utilize the native data services, integrating my SAP landscape running on Azure. I think for them it would be really inspirational, and they would love to test the solution and make it usable in their landscape.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it right. It's been a long sort of gap in the solution, and we have it there. So if you're listening to this, if any of our customers are listening to this, go out, try this. It's in public preview, and hope you love that. So with that, Nishan and Prasan, thank you very much for having me here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you again, Manish, and we
Thank
really
you, Manish.
appreciate your time on the show. With that, we've come to an end of episode 5 of All Things SAP on Azure with our special guest, Manish. And we wish you all a nice, pleasant afternoon and evening moving forward. Thank you very much, and cheers to all.
Yes.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you,
Cheers.
Nis.
Thank you,
Cheers.
guys. Thanks, Prasanjit. Thanks, Manish. Bye bye.
Yes. Bye.